Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
Welcome everyone. Today we're going to be talking about the chat room. This is the story of Mark and John. Now normally when I start off my stories, I give off dates, etc. But because of the nature of the crimes and because of the nature of who it involves, the ages of the people involved, I'm going to not really be giving out their actual names and be giving names to hide their identity. But you can actually look up the actual event that I'm going to be talking about online. So without further ado, let's get into it. Mark was your average 16-year-old boy. He went to school, he spent time at home, and he actually worked a part-time job washing dishes. And his parents had noticed that he was very addicted to getting online and talking to his friends. And at that time, there had actually began a chat room around the kids in school where they all kind of just came into this little chat room box and would talk amongst each other, talking about, classes, life, just in general, a way for all the kids to kind of be connected. And Mark's parents would go out and buy Mark a laptop so he could actually spend time within this chat room. And this became Mark's daily life for a while. He would just hop in, chat with his friends all the time, to the point that it pretty much consumed all of his life. To the point that he didn't really care about his schoolwork. He didn't really care about his job. He just did these things, but his whole day was wrapped around coming into this chat room and talking to his friends online. And there he would actually begin talking to a girl online named Rachel. And Mark and Rachel pretty much hit it off really well. And they began hitting it off so well that Rachel had suggested that they talk on a different site, and she wanted to introduce him to a friend of hers named John. She would go and tell him, you and John are so much alike, y'all would have so much in common. So Mark, Rachel, and John would begin talking on a different chat room. And not only would they begin chatting in the chat room, they would even start calling, doing FaceTime calls, etc. Everyone that is, of course, for Rachel. Now, Rachel would always tell Mark that she was really too insecure to get on camera. She didn't have money for a camera. And Mark eventually would say, well, let's just meet up. I just want to see the girl that I'm seeing. So they would set a date and he would get cold feet. Well, later after that, he would ask her to meet and she would get cold feet. And this would go back and forth for a while to where they eventually said, we're not going to do this. Now, around this time that Rachel, Mark, and John were talking, there was another person in the chat room that popped up whose name is Kevin. And Kevin would come on the chat room and he was kind of weird, but he kind of stood off because he was the only person in the chat room that would have like a highlighted signal in his chats. And he would tell people, hi, my name is Kevin. I'm a stalker and I love feet. And this was kind of weird and off-putting, but they were just kind of like, okay, he's harmless. And one day, Mark was trying to get a hold of Rachel, and he couldn't get a hold of her. He would go and call around everyone, seeing where Rachel was, and no one had heard or seen from her. It wouldn't be until later that Rachel would go and text Mark and tell him that she had actually been kidnapped by Kevin and was holding her hostage. Kevin would then go and tell Mark that if he would go and send pictures of his feet, he would let her go. Mark thought it was kind of weird, but he did what he asked. He took pictures of his feet and he sent it to Kevin. And Kevin was like, thanks. Rachel would then message Mark and tell him that she really wanted to meet him, to give him a hug and everything. So Mark was like, okay. And they set a time and a date to meet up, but Mark would go there, and after hours and hours, it was a no-show. So he went home like he always had. And he wouldn't find out till later when he would go in the chat room where everyone was talking and they were saying, I think there's something wrong with Rachel. And everyone was kind of like, what are you talking about? And they began saying, she's been missing for a few days, and I think that guy Kevin that was in the chat room killed Rachel. So Mark was inevitably crushed, and he would go and just kind of keep to himself, but he would still pop in the chat rooms every day. And John had noticed that he wasn't showing emotion about losing his girlfriend, to where John would tell Mark, are you okay? Like, I know she was your girlfriend and you loved her, but how are you holding up? To where Mark would tell John, listen, I'm fine. I don't want to talk about it. I'm going to deal with it on my own way. And eventually, things just kind of died out. And Mark would just appear in the chat rooms and nothing was said. Until one day, Mark would get another message. And this message was from a woman that worked in the government agency, well, being in the UK, MI6. And she would tell him that they wanted to kind of look at him to be a secret agent. And they wanted to make sure that he could pass the test and, pass a bunch of training to become a secret agent to protect the Queen. And Mark was all in. This was something that he thought was exciting, so he was like, yeah, sure. And the woman would go and say, and if you pass everything successfully, we can actually be in a relationship. And Mark fell for it, hook, line, and sinker. And he was like, anything that you want to do, like, just let me know, I'll do it. And that is where Janice, the lady that messaged Mark, would tell him that there was a specific thing they wanted him to do, and that was to protect one person called James Bell. And they would tell him that you actually know James Bell, but you know him as John. And they would tell him that at the bottom of the Atlantic was a safe that only James Bell's face could recognize, and inside the safe had over 730,000 pounds. And it was belonging to the Queen. And his job was to protect James Bell so that no one could actually kidnap him and take this money. So they would tell Mark that we want to give you a test. And they would tell him, we want you to contact James Bell, aka John, and we want you to ask him to hang out. During this time, you're going to be his personal bodyguard, and you're going to make sure that nothing happens to him. He will tell you that he's going to be going to a dentist appointment. Just overlook it and say that you just wanted to tag along. So Mark says, okay. He calls up John, and he tells him what's going on, and he wants to hang out. John's like, I'd love to, but I have a dentist appointment. And he goes, I'll tag along. And he does. And he tags along, he hangs out all day, he goes home to where he finds another message on his computer. And in this message, it said that you did a great job, we've been watching you, you did everything perfect. So now what you can do is you can go and start planning this move over to London where we can train you specifically, and we are going to train you to be an agent. But your job is still going to be to take care of James Bell. And that's going to do it for part 1 of the story. We'll be continuing tomorrow with part 2.